up a little bit faster before that. But right now, Bitcoin's appreciating 60% a year. The S&P index, which is the conventional cost of capital, is more like 14, 15% a year. So you've got like a 4x difference. The mainstream economy is plus 15 points. Bitcoin is 60. They're going to converge. As Bitcoin gets to the size of the S&P, when it's 100 trillion or 200 trillion and it's close to the S&P, it's going to be 1.5x the performance of the S&P. It's 20% versus the S&P. That means that it's an awful, way to build shareholder value. If I asked you, do you want to hold $100 billion of cash in bonds and you're Apple or Microsoft, the answer is no, because it's minus 20%. You might as well just give it back to the shareholders. They put it in the S&P index. But now look at the other side, right? Bitcoin is 4x that. So if I said you could put $100 billion into bonds or $100 billion into the S&P or $100 billion into Bitcoin, which of the three charts do you want? It's pretty obvious. You take the 60%. So what MicroStrategy did is we capitalized on Bitcoin, which is 60%, and then we levered it up with cheap convertible debt and equity raises, and we got to 120%. And that's how we ran 30x. Like, that's why we outperformed NVIDIA. Like, we're 2 or 3x NVIDIA over this time period, because we're actually capitalized. Now, coming back to the idea of growth, is risk stripped away from the capital and inflation stripped away from the capital. So when I evaluate any investment, my view is, okay, well, is it going to give me a risk-free 29% ARR? By the way, coming back to that, it's like 60% ARR collapsing down to like 20% over 21 years, and the average works out to 29%. And the assumption is the dollar supply keeps growing at 7, 8, 9%. And then you get an additional gain because we invent robots and AI and flying cars. And so the actual S&P index is growing because the U.S. prints more dollars, but it's also growing because we invent obscenely cool, useful things like the iPhone or like an electric car. So the future is good, but at the end of the day, Bitcoin's future is just pure digital capital, desirable property. Pay for it with fiat. How much is a guilder worth today? Like, pay for it with money you printed. Yeah. Borrow the money, but we borrowed the money to pay for Alaska. The country was broke in 1867. We just fought the Civil War, but what did we do? This guy Seward had the vision to print a $7.2 million check, pay off the Russians. And so, number one thing, buy the property. Number two thing, hold it for a long time, right? Because it might not feel like much, but when you're compounding over 100 years or 200 years, and so what do all those four have in common? Well, they're all something you would want to hold for more than 100 years. And so what is Bitcoin? Bitcoin is the next frontier. We've already gone as far west as we can go. Now we have to go to cyberspace. Eventually we'll go to outer space, but we're waiting for upgrades in propulsion to go to Mars and the asteroids. But between that 320 billion, that is destroying $32 billion a year. They are destroying $3 billion a month in capital because they're generating a 3% after-tax yield at best, and the cost of capital is 15%. So take 12% negative real yield on that. That is the cost. Multiply 325 billion times 12%. That's what the shareholders are paying right now for that. The second point I make is, if you look at Microsoft, for example, 98.5% of the equity value of Microsoft is based on forward expectations of quarterly earnings. And 1.5% of the value of Microsoft is based upon tangible liquid assets. And another way, first of all, it's Cynthia Lummis has put forth the proposal that the United States establish a strategic Bitcoin reserve, and it's a brilliant idea that she's presented to the Senate. And I have a slide in my presentation at the very end that actually shows it.
We don't have that one. Okay, just so you know, we don't have that one.
Okay, then I'll just describe it verbally. So that the geopolitical logic here is simple. It's go where all the money is going to go and buy it first. And so if you knew that everybody was going to move to Manhattan and you could buy 20% of Manhattan in 1650, it would be a good idea. But maybe more to the point, the British came to the New World and they grabbed the New World, and that's what created the British Empire. So the U.S. reserve currency status. It defends U.S. economic leadership. It attracts capital from our enemies. It attracts foreign capital, and it actually lays in place a peaceful, equitable solution to working out our differences with everybody in the world that's a business person would appreciate. And so, yeah, like if you could buy Manhattan for free with 60 guilders or some glass beads or something, and you knew that it was the best port in North America, and one day all of Europe's going to come and do business North America, ever. Buy it so you can give it to your grandchildren so your family will be rich in 250 years. That's what I would say about Bitcoin. And, Patrick, when you look at generations, when you're in your 20s, you have a lot of time on your hands and you want respect and you want prosperity. You want to make it in life. I need to make money so I can buy a house, have a family, buy a car, do whatever I want. And so you take your time and you invest it in making money. That's why the millennials, the Gen Zs, they get crypto, they get Bitcoin, because they have 100 hours or 200 hours or 1,000 hours. Now, when you get in your 60s or 70, 80s, how many people, past the age of 55 spend 100 hours studying a profoundly new investment idea to figure out?
Very rarely.
And I say, so tell me about that Bitcoin thing again. It's like, so that's what you'll find that when, you look at people and they're one or the other, but it takes a while for a paradigm shift. You got to really need it or want it. And that's why it's an exponential process.
So you're sitting there in 2020 and he said, tell me about that Bitcoin again with Eric Weiss.
Yeah.
And then from the moment he told you, what was your step process of researching? Was it an all-nighter till 4 o'clock in the morning? You sat up, you're like, I can't believe this is what's going on. Were you calling friends? Were you doing research? What was your process?
I said, give me the the top influencers on the internet on Bitcoin. He gave me a company, and gradually we formed a consensus. We formed teams. We started to power forward.
And then you presented it to the clients. Hey, here's what we're thinking about doing. This is the direction we're going. Is that what the next move was?
It takes from March all the way to August 10th of 2020. And on August 10th of 2020, what we did is we said, hey, we're buying $250 million of Bitcoin, but we're also going to buy back $250 million of our stock in a tender offer. The stock was like $120. This is like $12 post-split. And we offered a premium. We said, well, you can tender your shares if you don't like the Bitcoin strategy. And so that took 20 days, 55 growth to 52 to 50% a year.
Got it.
So it's like 50 to 45% growth a year for the next 4 years. And that's like doubling every 18 months or less than 18 months in that range.
I got it. So roughly 350 is, if we were to say $300,000 to $400,000, that's about the number.
I wouldn't be surprised.
You wouldn't be surprised if it's a number like that. But because you're long-term, you really don't care what it is. You're playing 21 years. You're not playing 4 years.
No, I'm in it forever.
And all your clients, how do you sell them on being in it forever? Okay, how do you sell them? If you're talking to me on the phone, I'm like, Michael, you want me to do what?
You mean my customers or my investors?
Customers.
Yeah, well, the customers of the software company, they're getting my interesting ETFs, MSTU and MSTX. Okay, I think MSTU went from like nothing to $2 billion in AUM in 3 weeks. And MSTX, last I checked out, $1 billion. So imagine an ETF that siphons up $2 to $3 billion of capital in like a few weeks, no marketing. And what they offer you is 2x MicroStrategy exposure. So when I think about it, I'm like, well, if MSTR is 1.5x Bitcoin, then those things are 3x Bitcoin.